Yarrick Miller had lived his whole life in the pits. They were not the kind of pits people imagined as prisons, but they felt like it, long halls of steel cages filled with the sound of growls, roars, and the heavy scrape of claws on metal floors. He was a beast handler like his father before him, and his job was simple: feed the creatures, keep them calm, and make sure they were ready when the masters called for them. The masters were not human. They were tall and cold, and they treated people like tools, not equals. Yarrick had learned at a young age that talking back meant punishment, and asking questions meant you would not last long. So he did his work in silence, moving among the cages with a steady hand, keeping his thoughts to himself. But Yarrick had something the others did not. He had patience. Where most handlers shouted and used whips, Yarrick spoke in a low voice, steady and calm, like he was speaking to an old friend. He would put his hand on the side of a scaled neck or a feathered back and whisper, "Easy now, that's it. You're all right." And somehow the beasts listened. They leaned toward him. They obeyed him. The other handlers noticed it. Some mocked him, calling him the Beast Whisperer with a laugh. Others just shook their heads, not understanding how he could stand so close to creatures with teeth bigger than his arm. But Yarrick didn't care what they thought. He cared about the animals because in a way they were the only ones who cared back. One evening when the suns were setting and the sky outside the colony burned red, Yarrick was called to a special holding chamber. He knew something was different the moment he stepped inside. The air was hot, thick with smoke, and the walls seemed to vibrate with a deep, rumbling sound. Behind the bars stood something larger than any creature he had ever seen. It was shaped like a nightmare, long wings tucked against its sides, scales that shimmered in the firelight, and eyes like molten gold. The masters called it a dragon. To them it was not a legend, just another weapon. But to Yarrick it felt like the old stories had come alive. The other handlers backed away in fear. One of the overseers shoved Yarrick forward with a sneer. "Go on, Miller," he said. "Let's see how brave you really are." The dragon lowered its head, smoke curling from its nostrils. For a long moment it was silent. Yarrick's heart pounded, but he did not run. He took a slow step forward, then another, his hands open, his voice steady. "Easy," he whispered. "You're not alone." The great beast blinked, tilted its head, and then to everyone's shock, it bowed. The cage went quiet. Yarrick stood frozen, staring up at the impossible. And in that moment he understood. His life of service was about to change forever. Yarrick Miller never forgot that first moment when the dragon bowed to him. It was like a secret had passed between them, something no one else could hear or feel. The overseers thought it was luck. The other handlers thought he had just been spared by chance. But Yarrick knew it was more than that. The creature had understood him. He named the dragon quietly under his breath when no one was around. He called it Ash because its scales shimmered like embers in the dark. From that day on, wherever Yarrick went, Ash's golden eyes followed. Days turned into weeks, and more dragons were brought into the pits, each one larger and fiercer than the last. The masters forced the handlers to train them for war, but most of the men and women failed. Some creatures thrashed until they had to be chained down. Others simply refused to move at all. The dragons would not listen to the whips or the shouts. Except when Yarrick stepped forward. He didn't shout. He didn't strike. He only spoke in the same calm voice he had used since boyhood, the one that had soothed hungry beasts and frightened young animals. "It's all right," he would say. "I'm here." And somehow these dragons, beasts bred only for battle, would lower their wings, tilt their heads, and listen. One of the handlers, a young woman named Emily Carter, began to notice. She worked beside Yarrick often, cleaning the cages and carrying feed. At first she said nothing. But one night, after watching him guide 3 dragons into their enclosures with nothing more than a steady hand, she whispered, "They don't see you as their master, Yarrick. They see you as one of them." Her words stuck with him. It was true. When he looked into Ash's eyes, he didn't see mindless fire or fury. He saw thought. He saw choice. And more than that, he saw trust. The masters, of course, noticed his talent too. To them, it was not wonder, it was opportunity. They began ordering Yarrick into battle drills. He would ride Ash into the training fields while other handlers scrambled to keep control of their dragons. The masters watched from their high towers, pleased that at least one human could make their weapons work. But Yarrick hated it. Every time he was ordered to send Ash into mock combat, every time he saw the dragons forced to destroy obstacles for their amusement, a knot twisted tighter in his chest. He cared for them too deeply to see them treated as tools. Still, he had no choice. He rode Ash because refusal would mean punishment, maybe even death. Yet, every time Ash carried him through the air, wings spread wide, Yarrick felt something stirring inside him, a power that wasn't the master's and wasn't the dragon's but his own. He began to wonder if the bond he shared with Ash was something the masters hadn't planned, something even they didn't understand. And deep down he knew this bond was going to change everything. Yarrick Miller had learned long ago not to trust the masters. They gave orders like they were handing down law, and if a handler failed, there was always another human waiting to take their place. But deep down, Yarrick still believed that if he worked hard enough, if he proved his worth, maybe he and the other handlers would be left in peace. That hope ended the day of the Great March. The overseers called every handler to the field. Dozens of dragons were let out, chained and restless, their wings twitching in the sunlight. Yarrick could feel Ash's unease beneath his hand, the dragon's chest rising and falling like a bellows ready to burst. Emily Carter stood nearby, her eyes narrowed as she glanced toward the line of masters waiting on their tall platform. "They're not calling us here for a drill," she whispered. "They mean to use you." Yarrick didn't answer, though the same thought was already burning in his chest. The masters pointed toward the horizon, where the sky shimmered with the faint glow of enemy ships. They wanted Yarrick and his dragons to attack, alone, against a fleet that could wipe out an army. It was no order for victory. It was an order for disposal. The truth struck him like a blade. They had never planned for him to survive. The bond he had with the dragons, the trust he had built, it frightened them. They needed him gone. The horn sounded. The chains were cut. The dragons leapt into the sky, wings slamming against the air like thunder. Yarrick rode high on Ash's back, the wind tearing at his face. The other dragons circled around him, waiting, watching, their eyes gleaming with something more than instinct. And for the first time Yarrick hesitated. He did not want to lead them to death. He did not want to throw away the only family he had ever known. The masters shouted through their comms, demanding he push the beasts forward. But their voices were nothing compared to the sound of Ash's roar. Yarrick gripped the reins, his heart racing. He could feel the fire building in Ash's chest, waiting for a command. In that moment, a choice opened before him: serve the masters and perish, or defy them and live. His jaw tightened. His voice came out firm, steady, louder than it had ever been. "Burn." Ash answered with a roar that split the sky. A stream of fire lit the horizon, tearing through the first enemy ship like paper. The other dragons followed, their flames rising in unison, a storm of wings and fire sweeping across the heavens. The masters screamed into their radios, demanding control, but it was too late. The dragons no longer listened to them. They listened only to Yarrick. Below, the handlers stared in shock. Emily's eyes filled with firelight as she whispered, "He's not serving them anymore. They're serving him." High above, Yarrick rode at the center of the storm, knowing nothing would ever be the same again. Word of Yarrick's defiance spread faster than fire itself. Across the colonies, whispers grew into stories and stories turned into hope. The masters had ruled for generations, and no one had ever dared to stand against them. But now there was a man, just a handler, nothing more, who had done the unthinkable. He had turned their greatest weapons against them. To the masters, Yarrick was a traitor. To the humans, he was a symbol. Yarrick didn't see himself as a hero. Each day was a struggle to keep his people safe. The masters unleashed squads of soldiers and machines, determined to crush him before his rebellion could grow. But he was never alone. The dragons answered his call, their wings darkening the skies, their fire driving the enemy back again and again. At first he thought the dragons were only following him out of instinct, some quirk in their design. But the longer he stayed with them, the more he realized it was more than that. They weren't weapons anymore, they were partners. When he touched Ash's scales, he felt a warmth that went beyond fire, as if the dragon understood every thought before he even spoke it. Emily Carter, who had stayed by his side through it all, noticed it too. One evening, as they sat on a cliff watching the dragons roost below, she said quietly, "They've chosen you, Yarrick. They're not chained beasts anymore. They're your people as much as we are." He wanted to deny it, but he couldn't. When Ash's golden eyes turned toward him, there was no mistaking the truth. The humans who had once been silent servants began to rally. They came from the pits, the factories, the mines. Some brought tools, some brought weapons, and others brought nothing but their courage. They didn't come for glory. They came because they believed. The masters struck harder. They sent fleets of ships, heavy cannons, and war beasts of their own. Each battle seemed impossible, yet Yarrick and his dragons answered with fury and grace. They moved as one, their flames tearing through machines, their wings shielding villages from destruction. Every victory pulled more people into the fight, and with each one Yarrick's name grew louder. They began to call him something new. Not handler. not servant. They called him the Dragon Lord. Yarrick never asked for the title, but he carried it all the same. He carried it for the people who had been silent too long. He carried it for the dragons who had chosen him when no one else dared believe it was possible. One night, as the campfires burned low and the dragons slept around them, Emily looked at him and asked, "Do you think this ends with us winning?" Yarrick stared at the stars, knowing the masters were gathering their full strength. He didn't know the answer. But as Ash's great wings shifted in the night, covering him like a shield, he felt something stronger than fear. For the first time in his life he felt free. The galaxy had forgotten about Earth. To most of the great empires, humans were just another minor race. Useful for labor, sometimes clever, but nothing special compared to the older civilizations that had ruled the stars for thousands of years. Humanity had no great fleets, no ancient technology, and no seat in the councils of power. But what the galaxy didn't know was that humanity had something far greater than machines or weapons. They had a spirit that refused to bend. When the alien empires gathered at the core to choose a new galactic prime, a single leader meant to speak for all worlds, Earth wasn't even invited. Delegates from across the stars came, each trying to outmatch the others with wealth, armies, and knowledge. Planets with cities of crystal. Empires with fleets that could blot out the sun. Species that spoke in voices older than human history. And still, in the middle of it all, a single human arrived. His name was Daniel Wright. He wasn't a soldier, not a scientist, not a king. He was a teacher from a small colony near the edge of known space. No one could understand why he had come. The guards laughed when they saw him step into the chamber, wearing no crown, no armor, just a plain coat and the steady look of a man who wasn't afraid. One of the lords of the council leaned down, his voice dripping with mockery. "What is this human doing here? This gathering is for leaders, not servants." Daniel stood tall. "Then you'll forgive me if I remind you," he said calmly, "that leaders are meant to serve." The words echoed in the chamber. For a moment silence fell. The other races boasted of their fleets, their wealth, their conquests. They spoke of power as if it were the only measure that mattered. But when Daniel's turn came, he did not boast. He told them of the farmer who worked through storms to feed his village. Of the nurse who stayed at her post while disease swept her city. Of the child who carried water for her family across broken land. "Power doesn't make us strong," he said. "What makes us strong is that we rise again when we fall. Every time. No matter how hard, no matter how far. That is what it means to be human." The chamber shifted. The laughter stopped. For the first time in memory, the ancient lords had no answer. It wasn't because Daniel had weapons. It wasn't because humanity had fleets hidden away. It was because he had reminded them of something most of them had forgotten, that leadership wasn't about fear but about hope. When the vote was cast, many expected the humans to be ignored as always. But one by one voices rose in Daniel's favor. Not because Earth was mighty, but because the galaxy needed what only humans carried in their hearts. And so, against all odds, a teacher from a forgotten colony stood before the stars as the new galactic prime.